Welcome to our Insight series on organizational well-being. Our question for this week is, how much funding should you request for your employee wellness program each year? Number 40. Now, when we address the issue of how much funding should you request for your employee wellness program each year, we're going to look at some variables that determine that. First of all, it depends on how aggressive your wellness program initiative is. The more aggressive, the larger the budget. And remember our feel-good model, which is kind of an introduction to wellness, our traditional model, which is more of a smorgasbord approach, and our results-driven program model, which is much more rigorous in its approach to evaluation and to long-term behavior change. The second point is that each geographic area has slightly different pricing of various wellness services for employees. So some variation will be driven by your location, and that's primarily rural locations, suburban, or urban locations. Third, here are some funding axioms that are generally true. First of all, axiom number one, the more wellness services to be delivered to employees, the higher the PEPY cost. Now, PEPY stands for per employee per year cost. And that's the way in which I would recommend that you look at your budgeting phenomena, not in total numbers or total cost, but in PEPY costs. The axiom number two is the more labor-intensive services like coaching that you use in your program, the higher the PEPY cost. Axiom number three is the smaller the employee population you're working with, the higher the PEPY cost. And that's primarily because the effects or the lack of effect of economies of scale that we get with larger employee work groups. Axiom number four is the greater the use of low-cost programming, the lower the PEPY cost. And that's basically when you use health plan provided services or nonprofit agencies or governmental agencies to deliver some of your programming, it lowers your PEPY per employee per year cost. The axiom number five in terms of funding is the higher the employer ownership of the program, the higher the PEPY cost. And that basically means that if an employer is taking ownership over the program and it's not perceived as the health plan's program, wellness program, then you're going to build more of the infrastructure and it's going to add to some of your costs. Axiom number six in terms of funding is the more rigorous the evaluation of the program that you carry out, the higher the PEPY cost. And it's because evaluation costs money. Axiom number seven is the higher the participation levels, the higher the PEPY cost. So the more people we get in our programs, the more effectiveness we have, but we also have increased cost. So the trade-off is essentially there. The fourth point is the typical cost ranges for wellness programs in 2024 dollars are as follows. We're going to look first at the PEPY costs, and then we're going to look at per 1,000 employees per year, which gives us more of a summary or total cost approach. And we're going to use the midpoints of the ranges we'll be talking about under PEPY. So the first one is the Feel Good Wellness Program model, which is our initial kind of entree into wellness, usually is less than $50 PEPY. And that comes out to about $2,500 or $25,000 for 1,000 employees. And that's using the midpoint of this 0 to 50, which is a $25,000 figure. The traditional model, which is more of a smorgasbord model, it's what we call an activity-oriented program, will usually have $51 to about $200 per employee per year as the base cost. And that adds up to a total of about $126,000 for 1,000 employees. The results-driven model, which is much more of an organized and more serious approach to wellness with a much more long-term behavior change focus, is in the area of $300 to about $500 per employee per year. And that adds up to about a $400,000, the midpoint, for that 1,000 employees. Now, the fifth point is the actual numbers that you are going to encounter with your program will depend a lot on the program intervention mix and the incentive structure you use. You really have to use incentives of some kind, and staffing strategy used. So the approach you use to incentives and staffing will then affect these numbers. These numbers are what we call the actual wellness vendor budget, the things that you buy outside, because the incentive and the staffing can in fact be done at very low cost depending on what your approach to programming is. So in summary, we have a situation where the wellness program coordinator should be asking for their programs to be funded at a level that is commensurate with their program goals, the model they choose, the program model, feel good, traditional, or results driven, and the proposed intervention strategies that they are going to use. Most employee wellness programs are significantly underfunded and relatively ineffective as a result. Funding for your employee wellness program will not usually be more than 1% of what is spent each year for worker health, and that includes health plan cost, sick leave related costs, workers' comp related cost, disability insurance, short-term and long-term, depending on if you offer that coverage to your and benefit to your employees, and the presenteeism cost, which is productivity loss that it comes from people staying at work but having an underlying health problem that's impeding their productivity. So remember, these numbers are less than 1% of what we spend on those 5 things I just went through. So we're not really asking for a lot of money in wellness. We've actually underfund our programs even with the reality of that spend. And it's usually because most organizations don't know how much they really spend on worker health. Now, for more information on this topic, put the following search strings into your web browser: cost of employee wellness programs, budgets for employee wellness programs, funding of employee wellness programs. Next week, we will address the question, why do employers usually offer an employee wellness program? For more information on this topic, please search on the web for the WellCert program.